Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Labour launches its Change Manifesto, but there's no new policy and tax rises aren't off the table. A new poll has suggested Reform UK has overtaken the Conservatives for the first time in the campaign. The world's most powerful leaders meet at the G7 to discuss support for Ukraine. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with economist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the Telegraph's deputy comment editor Annabel Denham. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. We're reporting on Labour's election manifesto launch. The Financial Times says the party intends to pump £8.6 billion into the UK economy, the majority of which would come from cracking down on tax avoidance and closing so-called non-dom tax loopholes. The Mirror quotes Sir Keir Starmer saying Labour will give the nation hope. The Eye leads with the latest opinion poll, which says Labour has overtaken the Tories on the issue of defence. But The Times reports that Labour is being accused of a conspiracy of silence over what its actual tax plans are. The Guardian too says there are doubts about how Sir Keir Starmer will actually fund his plan to fix the country. The Express carries a warning from Chancellor Jeremy Hunt for people not to fall into what he calls a tax trap. While the Mail also asks what Labour isn't telling people about tax rises to come. The Metro looks ahead to the start of Euro 2024 in Germany, with England's footballers hoping to end their 58-year trophy drought. The headline, "It's in their hands." While the Star says new technology will prevent any repeat of the infamous Hand of God goal that knocked England out of the 1986 World Cup. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Steve Richards and Annabel Denham. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the front page of The Guardian. Traditionally thought of as perhaps a Labour-supporting newspaper, but they're asking how Sir Keir Starmer will pay for his promises. Annabel.
Yes, you might expect a more sympathetic splash from The Guardian, expecting it to throw its weight behind Keir Starmer on the day that he announces and publishes his manifesto for apparently change, his agenda for a Labour administration, his vision for Britain after July 4th. And, you know, perhaps this is in some way reflective of the contents of the manifesto. You know, that as much as Keir Starmer is promising change, he's promising an end to the Tory chaos, there wasn't much detail in the manifesto. I'm not sure that people reading it, the voters, will be any clearer today than they were yesterday on exactly how Keir Starmer is going to deliver on some of his promises. There was a lot of talk about wealth creation, but we've had much of that over the last few years. It's almost imaginary wealth creation that politicians, leaders continually promise that they are going to generate wealth, that they're going to generate growth, and yet they have failed to deliver it. You know, yesterday we had the GDP data for April, which showed that economic growth had flatlined. Now, you could argue that Keir Starmer doesn't need to pull rabbits out of hats. In fact, he quite proudly said that he wasn't intending to do so. You know, we've talked a lot about his Ming VAR strategy. He's carrying something very delicate across a polished floor as he enters into number 10. He doesn't want to repeat the mistakes that were made by Labour ahead of the 1992 general election. And with a 20-point poll lead, why wouldn't he? It doesn't matter to Keir Starmer that voters will feel frustrated that they don't know enough about what a Labour government will look like and what it will do in power, because his lead is just so dominating over the Conservatives. But, you know, nonetheless, there are important questions to be asked over how Keir Starmer will pay for some of the change that he's promising. How is he going to improve public services, which are crumbling across an entire range of areas? And doesn't look like, at this stage, the Labour leader really has an answer to that.
Steve, what do you say? Do you think that these questions or these doubts raised about how he's going to pay for many of these promises, do you think they're justified?
Well, I'll come to that. I'll just respond to Annabelle's comments. I mean, it's flatlining at the moment because a government has been in power with a very different philosophy. It doesn't believe that a government working with the private sector can be an engine of economic growth to the same extent. I mean, Rishi Sunak's not a fan of an industrial strategy. There's no structure for the railways. There has been no levelling up of any significance. And so there is a perfectly valid argument that government, working with others, can be an engine for growth. And there are some good examples of how that might come about. However, on tax and spend, I do think the media response, the paper's response, is quite interesting. First of all, it's a reminder of how tough it is for Labour on this issue. Most of the newspapers think any tax rise is a disaster area, even though they call at the same time for more spending, quite a lot of them. But they have tried to navigate and hem themselves in to avoid questions like this. You know, these triple lock on VAT, national insurance, income tax, going further than Gordon Brown did in the build-up to 1997 and Tony Blair. And yet these questions are being asked. And I think the reason is because people can see in front of their eyes that there is going to have to be substantial spending, whereas actually the Treasury forecasts are for billions and billions of pounds of cuts. So there are gaps. And this trick that New Labour pulled off in '97 of rolling out income tax rises was such a novelty. These kind of headlines didn't come, but to copy it again is tricky, I think. And they might have been able to have a more grown-up conversation about what is required to deal with the mess of Britain, which they rightly put at the centre of this, and how it can be sorted.
Annabelle, the Times is going further and they're talking about a conspiracy of silence on cuts and high taxes.
Yes, Steve touched on that, the fact that at the moment the fiscal plans are to reduce public spending in real terms by as much as 18 to 20 billion pounds. And I think that what the cover of the Times and these warnings from economists are really touching on is the fact that we are going to have to make serious trade-offs. The Labour government have, Labour Party rather, not quite Labour government yet, the Labour Party have said that they're not going to borrow anymore. They've said that they've got this triple lock on tax, although they will preside over the tax burden increasing, tax as a proportion of GDP reaching over 37%, which would be a historic high. And something quite clearly has to give. And I think that, voters don't need experts, they don't need economists to tell them that. They understand that more and more money is being poured into the public sector, and yet the marginal gains seem to be ever narrowing, and that difficult choices are going to need to be made. And of course, Rishi Sunak, his pitch to the nation nearly 2 years ago was that he was on the side of fiscal responsibility and prudence, and that he would be the person to steady the ship and help us navigate some of these dilemmas, some of these trade-offs, but it hasn't exactly gone especially well. And I do still feel as though, much as Keir Starmer might be trying to project a message of change and hope, many people will worry that we're on this trajectory of managed decline and nobody has any real idea how they're going to steer us off it.
And to the Express, Steve, well, they're quoting Jeremy Hunt, who's somehow saying that Labour are tricking the electorate. Don't fall for Labour's hidden £8.5 billion tax trap.
Yeah, well, it takes some chutzpah, actually, from both Jeremy Hunt and the Express. But it's another reminder of how difficult it is for Labour when these are the mediators. I mean, the Tories put forward a whole series of tax cuts, which were incredible. They were too scared to delay the election and have an autumn budget or economic statement because there was no fiscal headroom for him to do anything. But there they were, promising billions of tax cuts, imprecisely costed. So that takes some chutzpah. However, it is going to be, I think, a running theme in the last, we've got three more weeks of this.
Yep.
How are you going to pay for it? What are the hidden taxes? And they say when Blair and Brown pulled off this trick in '97. No questions were asked about it. I remember when they did it, all the papers said, oh, wow, fiscal prudence, it's new, it's different. Rachel Reeves has been following a similar line, and yet these questions are being asked. I think because the context is so vividly challenging and requiring investment and money. And they also say, rightly, today in interviews, both of them, we're not going back to austerity. And yet there's this £18 billion of spending cuts, isn't there, in the sort of system. Now, they're not going to do it, but there is a valid question, therefore, of how are they not going to do it? And it's just not clear.
I mean, I do think context matters. Unfortunately, this isn't 1997 where we have 2.5% GDP growth every year. We are coming out of a pandemic, out of war returning to Europe. We've had multiple black swan events over the last decade, half decade, and the government has needed to respond to that in various different ways. And so I think that people are aware that the overall tax burden is set to reach a 7-decade high, and they're sensitive to that. I think people are much more attuned to this idea that even if Labour have promised a triple lock on tax when it comes to not raising VAT, income tax or national insurance, that's not to say that other tax...
Just very quickly, you've brought the mirror up. I've just got about sort of 20 seconds. Just this is a much more positive slant on the Labour manifesto, looking at the fact that Sir Keir Starmer is saying that he's hoping to give the nation hope.
Yeah, this is a very subjective theme. And there's the one unqualified sort of supporting Labour paper. But there are things in the manifesto which are really will be agents for economic growth. And that, of course, is part of the solution, but it will take a long time. And we're out of the single market, which, of course, wasn't the case in '97 as well, etc. So there are going to be really tough challenges in the short term, at least. And they'll have to take some tough decisions while they get a honeymoon, which they will get.
Stephen, Annabelle, for the moment, thank you. Coming up, the Gambling Commission asked bookmakers to look into whether there were other bets on the date of the election beyond the one placed by a senior aide to Rishi Sunak. We'll discuss that next.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling?
I am angry. Legal abortion! It is an anti-woman agenda.
2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
We're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world. Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Steve Richards and Annabel Denham. Let's take a look at the Telegraph front page. And this is a story that has now happened. We've kind of sort of thought that it might, but Reform has overtaken the Conservative Party in a YouGov survey, only by 1 point, but still a significant development.
I think it is, because it gives them momentum. I mean, Nigel Farage on the debate earlier on another channel was saying, we're now the opposition to Labour, which is the line he's wanted to push all the way through. And he's now got this, it's only one poll, and polls come and go, etc. But it gives more momentum, and it will fuel this sense of crisis in the Conservative Party. I mean, if they are overtaken in terms of votes, they won't be overtaken in terms of seats because of our voting system. The scale of the crisis will be even greater than we have all assumed it is. So it is a moment of significance, I think.
I agree. I think it would be easy to try and dismiss this, say that it's stated versus revealed preferences. People may want to protest against the Tories. They feel betrayed and let down, that they've failed to deliver on their various manifesto pledges from 2019, and indeed manifesto pledges made at previous general elections, that won't translate into seats, even if people do vote for reform. But nonetheless, this must be striking fear into the hearts of Tory strategists.
Just want to get to this last story. We've only got about a minute. This is on the Guardian front page, and this is the fact that the Gambling Commissioner are going to trawl through any substantial bets placed on a July election. That's following on from Craig Williams, the parliamentary aide to Rishi Sunak, who put a bet on for a July election.
Yeah, well, it would be extraordinary if others emerge from that kind of political circle. So I assume they suspect it might, but I don't know. But it's one of those stories, someone was telling me who was out canvassing today for Labour, that the story about Rishi Sunak not having a Sky dish, which of course he now has, so he'll be watching us tonight, has hit home. It's odd, the things that hit home. And this, I suspect, might be another one. I don't know what you think, Annabel.
Quite possibly. I think
know.
if you cast your mind back to 2015 when it was Ed Miliband and he had the Ed Stone and he had the bacon sandwich, and I think once it's in the mind of voters that the candidates simply cannot win, be that the Labour leader or the Conservative leader, then all the stories that follow just fuel it there. Exactly.
Yeah. Annabel and Steve, thank you very much for taking us through the papers. We'll see you at the top of the hour.